Okay, everybody. It is officially time to get this show on the road. My name is Andrew Wooldridge, and I'd like to welcome you to my webinar covering bow fishing. Just as a couple housekeeping items, we are recording this, and it will be posted to the department's YouTube page. So if you don't want to be seen on your camera, just go on and turn your camera off. If you have any questions or anything at any point, and I'll check with Courtney on this too, make sure she's good with it. I don't mind if you put it in the chat, or feel free to unmute and ask your question. Courtney, you good with that setup? Okay, Courtney's good with that too then. Some presenters find that distracting to have somebody just pop in and all of a sudden ask a question, so I like to make sure. There is 3 department staff on here, so if you put a question in the chat, we'll get to it as soon as we see it, and we'll check again at the end, so feel free to type any questions you have. We'll try to get it all covered. So the topic today, of course, is Bow Fishing 101. The hope of this course is to get you, as I like to say, dangerous enough to go out and try the sport, get involved. So our main presenter who knows the most about it is Courtney Goodman, pictured here. So the expert that she is. I'll let Courtney introduce herself real quick, and then we'll get started.
Hey everyone, Courtney Goodman. I'm the hunter training officer for Western Kentucky. So I kind of cover like hunter education, do some mentoring, R3 stuff as well. But I'm an avid bow fisher woman. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. So hopefully y'all have lots of good questions, and like Andrew said, feel free to ask. And if it's too complicated to type, you can jump on here and I really love questions, because that's kind of how we get off on our tangents and kind of can get more information out there. So go right ahead, Andrew.
Okay. So first thing we've got to get covered is all the regulations, and Courtney will hop in here as well and throw in some stuff. So you need a fishing license to bow fish. It kind of makes sense in a way. Legal bows to use: long bows, crossbows, compound bow, recurve bow, or a pneumatic air arrow launching device. Now I assume that means gas powered arrows, right, Courtney? Have you ever used one of those?
I've never used one, but I think they're basically like CO2 cartridge. I've never personally used one, but I would like to try, but I don't know anybody that has one. So
I'd say that's a very uncommon thing.
Yeah.
But it is legal, so I wanted to get it out there.
It'd probably be good for kids that can't pull a bow back or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what most of the crossbows, like you think about a crossbow, the ones a lot of them they have that are real easy to load and stuff, and so they work great for smaller kids who can't pull a bow back.
Yeah. So they must, your setup must also have a barbed arrow point or retractable style point with a line attached to it for retrieval. So we can't just shoot fish with arrows and let them swim away with arrow. We've got to have a way to get that back. And the fish cannot be discarded on the bank. That's considered littering and is subject to a fine. So you can't just shoot your fish and throw them on the bank and let them stink and all that good stuff. So that's everything regulation-wise can be found in the Boating and Fishing Guide and on the department's webpage, which I forgot to get Becky ready for that. If Becky can post a link to that in the chat, that way you guys can get to that easily. You can also find these at any sporting goods stores or Walmart in a hard copy version. So where can I bow fish? This is an interesting topic that I had not really considered. Is any body of water from a boat or from the bank that has public access, unless noted otherwise, is legal to bow fish from. So anywhere you can legally fish from, you can bow fish from. So, and then I've got 2 or 3 nice pictures here of different ways to do it. We got people fishing from the bank, from a boat, and then this brave soul in the top left standing up in a kayak and bow fishing. So that is an option. So locations that are off limits to bow fishing, and this is straight from the state regulations: Cumberland River below Wolf Creek Dam, any tributary of the Cumberland River below Wolf Creek Dam, and then these lakes listed here. So, and then also anywhere you can't go in a boat that is restricted for any reason. You can't obviously take your boat up in there, so you can't bow fish in there either. Usually around dams and stuff like that that have that off limits for power generating. So.
One more thing I'd like to add on there as far as like what's kind of off limits. Some of the smaller fish and wildlife lakes, they will stock grass carp in them for most of the time. I think it's triploid grass carp, which cannot cannot rebreed. They can't breed. Basically, they're hybrids that they can't breed. But I do know that if it's a department lake that they've stocked those grass carp in, you're not allowed to shoot those grass carp. And that was something that I can't even remember how I was digging in and found that information, but that was something that was new to me a couple years ago that we found out. So just a heads up on that.
Yeah. So basically what we always suggest is you look in the guide and look for any special restrictions or anything on regulations on where you're going. It can all be found in the guide, and most lakes will have a sign at the ramp that'll have those regulations as well on them. So, fish that are off limits that you cannot harvest bow fishing are the fish that we consider sport fish. And here's a very nice long list. There's a lot more species that are considered sport fish than I initially expected. But the good way to think about it is if it's a target species for what I would consider a traditional angler with a hook and line, is usually off limits fish. Now there are some weird, I don't know what you'd call it, caveats to that, but in general, these fish species listed here are a non-harvest. Now, if you accidentally harvest one of these fish on accident, my suggestion is that you contact the game warden and let them know that you did it. I doubt they'll be entirely upset, but just being honest is better, is the best policy. So, and I assume once you get out and you actually see some of the fish, you'll be able to tell, oh, that's a bass. That's not a legal fish, so I'm just going to pass on it. So,
yeah, the more time you spend out, you will start kind of picking up. I would say bass is probably the hardest one to differentiate from like a buffalo or something, just because you'll see them in a lot of the same areas that you'll see buffalo and drum. And if it's kind of muddy, it's kind of hard to tell. The hardest one is definitely going to be that alligator gar, though, because unless you have it in your hands and can count the 2 rows of teeth, or it's just a monster, it's really, they're very closely identical to like especially when they're small, like a spotted gar or something. I've personally never seen one or never shot one in Kentucky, but since we re-released them into Kentucky, yeah, you can't shoot them here, but other states you can. So Kentucky's just a little bit stricter on that, but there are some states that you can go and shoot alligator gar.
Yeah, so that's I actually have more slides on that because I've learned a lot more about our alligator gar since getting ready for this. But the legal fish to take with your archery equipment are considered rough fish, and that's just how we classify the types of fish. So catfish, paddlefish, any of the carp species, the common or the black or anything like that. Big head is probably the most popular fish I'd say that's probably targeted in silver. Buffalo, if you've never seen one of those, I suggest you go to the Kentucky Fishes page on the department's website. If Becky will post that in the link. It's just they got nice pictures and stuff and characteristics to look for on the fish. A drum, also known as a white perch, is what some people will call them occasionally. The gar species, the spotted, the long nose, and the short nose are all legal to take. And like Courtney said, the alligator gar is not. And then any fish in the sucker family. And there is more. These are just the most common ones I think you'll run into, because the chances of you seeing a mad tom catfish and shooting it with your archery equipment are pretty slim. So, but these are the main ones you'll see. Some caveats is paddlefish and catfish, you can only harvest so many. They go to a limit. And I believe that is 5 and 2, if I researched that correct. Is that right, Courtney? Yeah, and that's a night. It's just your daily limit, correct? Okay. That's why I have Courtney. She's the expert. So here's some pictures of some of the legal fish, some that Courtney has harvested herself. So we've got the paddlefish. What kind of carp is that, Courtney? Do you remember?
So that is a smallmouth buffalo. The one where I've got my bibs on, that's a smallmouth buffalo. Yeah. And did you put the picture of the big head carp somewhere later on, maybe?
Is that the one at the front in the beginning?
Yeah. Or no, the one in the very beginning, that is a grass carp.
Okay.
So we've got grass carp. I sent you a picture of a big mouth or a big head. And then I've got a smallmouth buffalo, and then I've got a paddlefish here. I could have sent you a picture of like all species, but I didn't get to. I didn't think about that. But yeah, you can see the drum up in the right top right.
And you got a gar. Yeah, I think that's a
If
long nose.
my deck looks like a long
Yeah.
nose.
And then you've got
And
your
on the
common carp.
bottom, yeah. Now common carp, that's a small one. They get bigger. The biggest one I've probably ever shot is about 10 pounds, but that's my biggest paddlefish there on the side. They get huge. I mean, my brother shot 50-pound paddlefish before.
So but yeah, these are just some of the common things you run into. I'd say the most common will be your buffaloes and catfish and things like that.
Depending on where you're at too.
Yeah, your habitat that you're in, of course.
If you're down here in Western Kentucky, like on the river and stuff, you're mainly going to be shooting silvers, which is the one of the Asian carp species. They're probably the most plentiful. But it really just depends on where you're at. Most places, though, I'd say gar is the most common. You can pretty much shoot gar anywhere in the state of Kentucky.
So speaking of gar, here is pictures of the 3 legal gar species. So this is, of course, the side profile. And more than likely, if you're on the boat, bowfish, you're going to be looking down on top. So, but if you are like a stream angler, you'll be able to see them from the side occasionally as well, just at a slight angle. So you'll be able to see the nice spots on the spotted gar, which makes them very distinct. So, but then here's another picture of just some nice general head shapes if you're looking down onto them. This comes straight out of our Kentucky Fish book. So this is a nice little book to pick up if you can find a copy of it. That's got some nice ID features on it. It does go into size range and habitat, so you can kind of get a rough idea of, oh, I'm in the river in the back of a cove, I'm more likely to see this gar. So it's most likely a safe gar to harvest. Now, let's see. So that's all I got. So we'll stop sharing this. Any questions on what we've covered so far?
Andrew, I just wanted to say that the Fish ID book is in PDF version on our website, and I did put that link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. Now let me go share my screen again here. So now we are on the department's webpage. Can everybody see this? Courtney, can you see it good? Okay. So once you've come to the department's page, you just click fishing tab right here, and this will take you to this page. Now this, oh wait, this is taking me too far actually. Go back a page. There we go. So this is the main fishing page. This is a great resource to just log on to because you can get your fishing and boating guide right here. It's got all of our fishing information. And it's even got this nice little application to find a place to fish. Now this works for regular rod and reel angling and also bow fishing as well. And you can figure out, do I need a ramp for my boat or do I need bank access? So you can select all those features here. And then as you scroll on down, you have this nice little fish ID section to go through all sorts of different things that you might need. And then getting back into the gar family, we have nice pictures of the alligator gar here. Now, the alligator gar is an interesting species for Kentucky because it was considered completely eradicated from the state. And then we started reintroducing them back in 2009. And so we've got all these nice programs for them. They were stocked special in Western Kentucky. So lots of counties and places in Western Kentucky will have alligator gar. So I wanted to make people aware of that, that alligator gar are not really statewide. So most likely if you're in the Elkhorn Creek here in Frankfort, you're not going to run into an alligator gar and you shouldn't have to worry about IDing that. But I just want to make people aware in the western part of the state that there's potential you could run into one and that they would be of significant size to harvest because the biologist who actually raised and introduced the first gar here with us, he sent me this cool article. This was an alligator gar taken in Indiana. That was one that we released back in 2009. So, I mean, this is 10 years later. This is a big fish. It was the first one they've had on record too there forever, but we found out it came from us with radio collaring stuff. So they are big enough to where you would run into them in the western part of the state. So, and we've introduced a bunch. So I just wanted to make people aware of that potential.
Clark's River, I know, is one of the big focus areas that they released them, and that you definitely could find some in Clark's River.
So, I mean, the numbers are not high. So still, I would say more than likely, you're going to see the other gar species first. But I just want to make people aware of that. So if you see something that's like, I'm not sure, I would just say pass on that fish and move on. So now, as far as breaking down equipment and things like that, I will hand it over to Courtney now and let her take over.
Do you mind going back, or should you make me host so that mine?
You're co-host, so you can share and do whatever you want.
All right. I don't really want to share. I just want my screen to be like the main one. Is that
You are.
how it is for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's what I was. Okay. So he showed a picture of the bow. It talked about different types of bows. So we can use recurves, we can use crossbows, compound bows. Personally, I prefer a compound bow, and I'm not going to get, I'm not sponsored by anybody, but I am going to talk about a brand just because everything we use is pretty much this brand. It's not, it's just what we like, and it's worked really well for us. We use pretty much all AMS stuff. There's lots of different companies. There's Muzzy, there's Cajun. Those are some of the big ones. In AMS is technically kind of owned by Matthews. Like the bows that they use are kind of like a Matthews knockoff, if you want to say. But I have my bow right here, and the biggest thing is you don't have to go out and buy a specific bow fishing bow. I've been doing this for 10 years. The first probably 8 years that I did it, I just used an old hunting bow that I had, which works perfectly fine. But once you get to a point where you're fishing tournaments and out as we do, I like to have the option of snap shooting. Okay, so I'll break that down as to what that actually means. So if you're using a recurve, if you've ever used a recurve before, you know that when you draw a recurve back, the farther you draw it back, the harder the poundage is, okay? So you can draw and shoot pretty quick that way. With a compound bow, they have what's called let off. So when the cam rotates over, and the cam is, we have a pulley and a cam. This is a little bit different, and I'll explain in just a second. But once the cam rotates over, you have what's called let off. So you have to pull that compound bow all the way back. When I was doing it with my old hunting bow, I had to pull it all the way back every time to be able to shoot, which takes, it doesn't sound like it would take a lot of time, but it really does. It makes you shoot slower, and it just kind of slows you down a little bit. But for a beginner or somebody who just wants to do it every now and again, go out, you got a free weekend, go out and shoot some fish, that there's no big deal. That works perfectly fine. And I did it for a long time. We got into doing tournaments. I wanted to start shooting faster, so I got an actual bow fishing bow. This is the AMS Hooligan. And basically you can do what we call a snap shooting. This has no let off. So it doesn't matter what my draw length is, what your draw length is, I can hand this bow to anybody, and as long as they can pull it back with the poundage that it's at, you can shoot it. So you can shoot it here, you can shoot it here, you can shoot it here, all the way back there. There's no let off. So you can shoot a lot quicker. If I've got a fish really close to the boat, I won't pull this back all the way because I don't want my arrow to go all the way through it, because then I have to cut my arrow and retie, and it's just a pain. So that's kind of an advantage to be able to shoot faster. Now, as far as other things about this, the biggest thing that you need is when you have a bow, say you have an old hunting bow or something you want to turn into one, you're going to have to buy the bottle and the reel system. Okay. So that's what we've got right here. Usually you can get a whole setup for about 120 bucks, 130. They may have gone up a little bit, but I think the last time I bought it was about $120. You get the bottle and you get an arrow with that. Okay. And then the next thing you'll need is a rest. And you can see right here, this is the kind of rest I have. I'll kind of explain that in a little bit more. There's different ones. But if you have a whisker biscuit on your bow, that'll work. The biggest thing is you don't want like a drop away rest that you would get off a hunting bow. And if you're not familiar with that, when you draw your bow back, it lifts up, and then when you release, it drops down so that your arrow is not touching anything, which is great for deer hunting and stuff, because it just allows that arrow to usually shoot a little straighter or something, because it's not touching anything, right? But you don't want that for bow fishing, because you're moving, you're not 100% level at all points. The whole time you're not going to be level. You're going to be moving, the fish are going to be moving, you're going to be adjusting, and if you don't have a rest that encompasses the entire arrow, there's a good chance that that's going to fall out. So you get the bottle, and if you're familiar with bows at all, you'll know that when you put sights on a bow, you put them up here. The bows come with a thread that you can attach different sights, whether it's lighted sights or, pin sights or whatever type of sights you use. You'll want to take those sights off, and that is where the bottle actually mounts. So you have different pieces, and I'll just kind of show you real quick. So I'm just going to take this off so I can show you what that actually kind of looks like. It's literally just a black plastic piece.
Let me interject here for a second, Courtney. Something to think about is, I would say 90%, if not 100% of compound bows will have this.
Yes.
Threaded
Oh,
spots.
yeah, they all have it.
Now, your recurves and long bows, some do not. So make sure if you're buying a bow for this, you make sure they have those threaded spots, because I shoot a recurve and mine had that spot. So I had to make sure it had it, and some don't. So you can't just go buy an old recurve from the yard sale and it automatically work. You just something to be aware of when we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah. They also make special reels just for recurves, like the older style reels. I'm pretty sure they don't have to have all that. But I don't recommend those because you have to like hand reel them, and that if you already have one laying around, they work fine. But I recommend don't spend the money on one of them. Go ahead and get you a bottle, because these are awesome. You can't beat them. So basically, you'll notice that there's just a little bracket here, and it's got a little metal piece here that slides back and forth. Okay, so you mount this to your bow, and all that is a couple of Allen head wrench screws. So you'll mount that on, and then you have your bottle here, and you can see that there's a hole through that. You figure out how far up and how far back you want it. You kind of play with it with this screw, but I usually like mine a little more forward. So all you have to do is, this comes with a little wing nut screw. You'll stick it through that hole and line it up on that metal piece, and it just literally screws in. That's how easy it is. If you've got an Allen wrench set and a set of fingers here to screw this on, you can have a bow fishing setup pretty quick. Now the rest, it's the same. It uses Allen head. Most of the ones I've ever used, we keep a set of Allen wrenches on the boat at all times, because pretty much everything you can do on a bow, you just need Allen wrenches. We were talking about, I said something about poundage earlier. Poundage is the weight that, as you pull the bow back, it is the weight that it takes for you to pull that bow back, basically, in a nutshell. And to adjust poundage on those, you look on the limbs here. It's just a little Allen head, and there's one on each limb, and it's very important that you adjust them equally. So if I'm handing my bow off to a kid that can't pull my bow back because I'm pulling about 40 pounds, if I hand it off to a kid, I would turn that down. If I'm going to turn this down, if I do one full rotation on the top, I'm going to make sure and do one full rotation on the bottom. If you ever get off, that can kind of mess you up. So if you ever do get off with it, just go ahead and screw it all the way down on both ends, and then restart from there so that you know it's equal. Because if you got one limb tighter than the other, you could potentially tear up your bow that way. Let's see. No questions so far. Does anybody have any questions as I'm going through this? I feel like there's got to be a few questions running through somebody's mind.
I've got one that people might not think to ask.
Go ahead.
You were talking about your draw weight and poundage. Do you have a suggested poundage that's ideal, or is there a minimum that you suggest?
Okay. So I will say that I've seen people shoot fish with as low as 20 pounds. Now, when you shoot with 20 pounds, you're not going to shoot very far, and you're not going to have very good penetration. So you could potentially shoot a fish with a 20-pound draw weight, but I don't recommend that. But if you're just starting out, or you're a kid or something, we took a kid out last weekend who I had to turn the bow all the way down because he was having so much trouble pulling it back. And he was able to harvest a gar, but he shot a carp and it pulled right out. So it really, you can do it, but it's not ideal. Now, I would say if I was getting a bow and I can't pull back 40 pounds, I'd say probably need to get to at least 30. 30 is when you're really getting enough penetration. on those fish. And you also have to think you're shooting through the water. So you want to have a little bit of oomph behind it to be able to get in the water and get into the fish. Gar are very tough fish. If you've ever caught a gar or held one, I mean, it's almost like leather. They're very tough fish. And so I have watched arrows bounce off a gar or just skim off of them, because you got to hit them perfect sometimes to actually be able to harvest them. But carp are a lot softer. And so carp actually, your arrow can pull out easy just because they're a soft fish. And as you're fighting them, if it's a big fish, it can pull out. And while I'm talking about that, that's why they have different types of arrows. So I don't know if you can see the tip on that. That kind of looks nasty, don't it? It's a big, like, grappling hook almost looking like. This right here is the type of arrow that we use for carp, especially like big heads and silver carp, because they're such a soft fish. Gar arrows, they won't have 3 big prongs like that. They'll just have 2 little ones for the most part, because once you get in a gar, you're pretty much stuck in it because they're so tough. But there are lots of different types of arrows. This is just our favorite because once you get in a carp with this, it takes a lot to be able to pull that out and the fish get away. It happens, but not very often. So this is my bow fishing arrow. You can see it's got a slide, or yeah, we'll talk about the different parts of the bow fishing arrow. And Andrew, if I skip something, just let me know here. Well, if I can set my bow down. Okay, so there's all kinds of different arrows. This one's actually pretty cool. It glows in the dark. So if I hold this in front of the lights, and then I shoot a fish, it'll actually glow, in the dark as it hits the fish. You'll see it kind of glowing in the water. So that's kind of cool. But they make all kinds of different arrows. These are pretty heavy arrows. These are not your carbon arrows. They're not like what you would shoot out of your compound bow at a deer. They're fiberglass, so they're a lot heavier, but they're a lot stronger too, because you don't always hit fish. I mean, some days you could shoot, some nights, if I shoot 50 times, I might hit 3 fish, and the rest of that is in the mud or in the rocks or in a tree or bushes or whatever. So that's why they're so tough. Now, you'll notice this slide here. This is very important. And there is a screw at the back. Now, I'm actually missing a piece. It broke off. There's usually a little black plastic piece that encompasses this screw. It's not super important, but mine broke off, and these arrows are expensive, so I'm going to use it until this arrow is done. This arrow right here is about a $35 arrow by itself. So Andrew was talking earlier, you can't just shoot arrows into fish without a string, and you wouldn't want to, because every arrow you would shoot, you would lose, and that'd be about 20 to 30 bucks. I don't think you can find a bow fishing arrow under $20 right now. I have not seen one, and if there is, it's probably not worth much, because they're usually about $20 to $30. And then you have your knock, just like every other bow. You have a knock on the back. Now, you're probably wondering what the point in this screw is. This screw is actually to keep the slide from going all the way off the arrow. Okay, so this slide is what allows you to be able to bring your arrow back with you. So when you knock, I'm going to turn this the other way actually so y'all can see. When you knock your arrow, you always want to make sure, and as you can see, I've got line wrapped around my reel here. This is a big no-no. You would never want to shoot like that, because then your arrow is going to get stuck. So what I do is I reel up my slack, and I usually have just about that much hanging off. That way, when I shoot, I know that the line's free, and I'm going to be able to reel my arrow back. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm pulling this trigger right here. So when you shoot, you need your line completely loose, because it needs to be able to fly out without getting caught on anything. You notice that there's a lot of different bow fishing reels that look like a Zepco 33 reel, if you know what I'm talking about. Just an old overhand cast. Is that a spin cast? Is that what they call them, Andrew? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, they're spin cast
so
with a push button.
Yeah, with the push button, okay? They work great, don't get me wrong, but I can't even count on 2 hands how many people have been in the boat with me that have forgotten to push that button, and then their arrow is gone because they shot and it snapped and and they lost a $20 to $30 arrow just because they forgot to hit that button. That's why I do not use those kind of reels, because I don't have a very good memory. And when you get in the heat of things and you're shooting a bunch of fish and you're excited, that's the first thing you're going to forget is to hit that button. So that's why I like these bottle reels a lot better. So after you shoot and you're trying to reel up your line, there is a trigger here. You can notice you adjust the reel. When I was putting this reel on, you would adjust it to where your finger, I use my middle finger because it's a little bit longer, but you adjust it to where that finger can grab that, and then you just reel in, and that puts a little bit of pressure. There's a wheel up here that it moves down, and it puts a little bit of pressure on that line and allows you to reel that up. And it takes practice, because some of them you have to push really hard, some of them just a little bit. They're all a little bit different, but that is the basic gist of how you actually reel your arrow back in. And it does take a little bit of practice. I forgot to talk about my finger tabs here. They're kind of dirty where they've been in the bottom of the boat, but these right here, you'll notice that we call those finger tabs. So we don't use releases. We shoot kind of like NASP, except we don't use 3 fingers on the bottom. We put 1 up top and 2 below. Okay, so if you were back in the day learning how to shoot recurves and stuff, that's how they used to teach for shooting recurves. NASP, we teach 3 fingers below, but for bow fishing, 1 top and 2 below. Actually, I will put 3 below just because my hands are small and it makes it a little bit easier for me to pull back. When you're bow fishing, it's not as precise like when you're bow hunting. I'm an avid bow hunter. I grew up bow hunting, and when I took over bow fishing, it was like it's everything. It goes against everything you learned when you're trying to compound hunt. Okay, compound bow hunt. Like, you don't have sights. You just use the tip of the arrow to aim. It's all very instinctual. So if you shoot shotguns and rifles, you know, you aim a shotgun or you aim a rifle, you point a shotgun. It's all kind of an instinctual thing. And so that's why it's one of those things you just have to do it to figure it out. Once you hit your first fish, you'll be like, okay, that's what I got to do. That's how I got to aim. And there's not a whole lot of aiming. It really is a lot of instinctual. But you can use the tip of the arrow to aim. If you've ever shot NASP, any of those NASP bows, that's kind of how they aim, because there's no sight. So you just use the tip of the arrow. But once you hit a fish, you start figuring out what you got to do and what you were doing wrong before. A lot of times people will shoot over top of fish. That's probably the most common miss, is people shooting over them, because when a fish is under the water refracts the image of it, and so it actually looks like it's higher than it is. If there's a fish sitting a foot below the surface of the water, I will shoot under its belly. I will try to aim under its belly, and normally that'll put me dead center of the fish. And that sounds crazy, and that's really hard to get used to, because if you shoot bows, you're used to aiming at what you want to hit and you put it on it, right? With bow fishing, you don't aim at what you want to hit, you aim below it, unless it's on the surface. Gar tend to be on the surface, and you don't really have to adjust much for gar. But I've shot carp that were 3 foot down, and I felt like I was aiming 3 foot below the fish. And it just takes practice of being able to tell how deep the fish is, because sometimes they look like they're a foot deep and they're 3 feet deep. It just takes a lot of practice. A lot of people get frustrated because they go out a couple of times, they don't hit anything. It really just takes practice. Trying to think what else I'm missing here.
Courtney, we do have 2 questions in the chat.
Okay. Sorry.
The first one was, what about bow fishing with a Genesis bow? And that kind of goes into the next question, which is, will NASP be starting bow fishing?
Okay, so you can bow fish with a Genesis bow. I have actually, one of the camp bows. I would crank them down as tight as they go, because they'll go to 20 pounds. But like I said earlier, you can shoot a fish with them. You get a big fish, you're probably not going to get it back. Your arrow's probably going to pull out of it. You can shoot gar with them. Now they do make, I can't remember the new Genesis bow. Do you know what it's called, Andrew?
No, it's like a next step up from the
Yeah,
regular
I think
Genesis. It goes a little higher. in
They can
weight.
go to like 30 pounds, I think.
I
if
think
I
it's
remember
basically
right.
the same technology that your bow fishing bow is essentially.
Yeah, because the Genesis bows don't have let off either.
No.
I kind of like to call it a souped up recurve, because really that's all they are. Because if there's no let off, I feel like I know the compound bow has to do with the cams and the pulleys and stuff, but when there's no let off, in my mind, it's just a real pretty souped up fancy recurve. And that's kind of how the Matthews Genesis bows are. But yeah, Matthews makes the Genesis, Matthews makes these AMS bows. And so, yeah, they're basically the same thing. But the new Genesis that can go up to 30 pounds, my brother is actually talking about getting one for when we have kids out on the boat, just because, they're perfect little bows for this. That is exactly what you would want, is something like that where you can shoot quick. And 30 pounds is plenty. 30 pounds will Gen X. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, the Gen X. I'm pretty sure that's right. But yeah, those bows would work just fine. The regular Matthews Genesis, I would crank them completely up as high as they'll go, which is 20 pounds, and you can shoot a fish with them. If you get a big one, there's a good chance you're going to lose that fish, but it's doable for sure. But I would say 30 pounds is probably what I would recommend a minimum for an adult. Now, if it's a kid, that's a little different because they're not going to be able to pull 30 pounds. But if you can pull 30 pounds, I would try to stick with that. I pull 40 pounds. My brother pulls 50. Yes, just my brother can shoot further than I can just because he's pulling a little more poundage. But I've had nights where I've shot 100 to 200 times at fish. And if I'm pulling any more than 40, I get wore out pretty quick. It doesn't take long. So this is also a great way in the summertime to gear up for bow season, because you're using those same muscles that you would use while you're bow hunting to pull that bow back and be able to hold it back for a long time. So this really helps you kind of get ready in that off season when there's not really anything to hunt. I know we got a summer squirrel season right now, but that's about it. So when you're in the off season and you be able to pull a bow back, bow fishing is a great option for that. As far as the other question, will NAS be starting bow fishing? I'm not sure about that. I know that they've done some after. I think Lisa did some, like, what did she call it?
NASP alumni.
NASP alumni, yes. The NASP, thank you, Becky. The NASP alumni, I know they've done some extra events, and I think they were wanting to do a bow fishing one, or they may have. I know she was talking to me about it. I think maybe COVID might have messed with that a little bit, but that is something that they're interested in. But I don't think they'll be able to make it like a tournament like NASP, just because it wouldn't be practical to be able to get everybody out on the water and stuff like that. But it definitely can be done with those bows for sure.
It is a thing. Courtney, Lisa's still in the planning stages.
Still in the planning stages.
Yeah.
Okay. I knew she had mentioned it to me.
She's treating it like the next step. She wants to keep the NASP kids still engaged in archery in some way, and this is a cool way to do it.
Oh,
They can use their bow they already have, even though it might not be the most ideal. It's that good little, I already have this bow, I need the reel. And if they like it, they can upgrade their bow and keep the reel. So it's a nice little stepping stone up.
Yeah. And speaking of that, this kind of made me think about it, because Lisa is up in the Frankfurt area. Y'all are up in the Frankfurt area. Many of you might be thinking, well, where can I go bow fishing? I know he kind of covered that a little bit. But if you're in Western Kentucky, you're kind of in the motherland of bow fishing, because you can pretty much go anywhere and shoot fish. We go below Kentucky Dam a lot. That in the summertime, below Kentucky Dam on a hot day, you can really get on the Asian carp big time. Last weekend, I bet we got probably 30 silver and a few big heads last weekend, several gar. But if you are in Central Kentucky or Eastern Kentucky, your options are a little more limited, just because we don't have Asian carp that way, but there still are things to shoot. So I know growing up, I'm from Georgetown, and so I used to fish Elkhorn Creek a lot. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, if you go below the Jim Beam distillery where that dam is, if you go below that, I have seen people bow fishing common carp and gar down there several different times, because it gets real shallow and you can see them cruising around. The Kentucky River If you go below any of the dams on the Kentucky River, there's gar everywhere. If you've ever fished out there, you could see there's gar everywhere. So you could go out there and shoot gar. Laurel Lake is full of common and grass carp. Common carp, you can definitely shoot all those. There's a bunch of common carp. We used to fish for them for dough balls when I was a kid. Cumberland is going to be a little hard. You could get on some gar, but the deeper the lake is, the harder it is. The reason it's Kentucky Lake and Barkley are so great is because they're shallow, very shallow. And if you can't see the fish, you can't shoot them, right? So the deeper the water is, the harder it is to actually see fish and get on them. And the deeper it is, the harder it is to actually shoot them. I would say if they're any deeper than 3 foot, it's really hard to get an arrow to penetrate that far underwater. So it really just depends on the area you're in. A lot of creeks and small rivers have gar. And so I'd say gar, they're pretty much everywhere in Kentucky. That's probably the most common fish to be able to bow fish, but common carp are everywhere too. You just got to be able to find a shallow enough spot to be able to find them. One thing I wanted to cover too, I was talking about bow fishing below Kentucky Dam. So a lot of people ask me, is it better to bow fish at night or during the day? It depends on the weather and it depends on the day. So if it's a hot, sunny day where it's not cloudy, the sun's shining bright, and it's not windy, I love fishing in the daytime. Because you can, if the sun's up and bright and it's not cloudy and the wind's not blowing, so it's not messing with the top of the water and you can see down in there in the daylight, sometimes that's some of the best bow fishing. Grass carp love mulberries. So if you know of a spot that has a bunch of mulberry trees around the water, I can't tell you how many grass carp I've shot in the middle of the day that were coming up mouthing, trying to eat mulberries off the top of the water. Some people use a mulberry bait when they're fly fishing for carp. You can do that. It's the same principle. You just find those mulberry trees and they'll be mouthing up under there and you can shoot them that way. But yes, you can shoot them during the day, but there's nothing that beats shooting them at night with the light. When you kick that light on and there's fish everywhere, depending on where you're at. If you're below the dam, there's times where we'll turn the light on, there'll be 200 fish sitting in front of us. And the hardest part is picking out a single fish and not trying to group shoot all of them, which Becky has been below Barkley with us before on the river. So she's kind of seen a little bit of that. You'll turn the lights on and fish just kind of go everywhere. It can get a little distracting because it's hard to pick out a fish, but it really just depends on where you're at. And if anybody has any questions, I'm not sure where everybody's from, but if you're from Western Kentucky, I can tell you exactly where to go. We got questions. Oh, Becky said, yeah, it's such a good time. It is a lot of fun. Some of you may wonder what we do with the fish. I know Andrew mentioned that you can't just throw them up on the bank, and that is true. There is nothing that makes me madder than going to a boat ramp, especially down here, where there's just carp and gar everywhere. It's just ridiculous. People will shoot fish, take pictures on the ramp, and then just throw them in the ground. That is littering and that is illegal. If you shoot a fish and if you want to keep it to eat, that's perfectly fine. Throw it in a cooler, whatever. If you don't want to keep it, you pop the swim bladder. So you take a pocket knife and you jab it underneath the top dorsal fin. There is what's called a swim bladder. A lot of times you can kind of hear it. Excuse me. You can kind of hear it pop. Once you pop that, excuse me. Once you pop that swim bladder, it will sink. So that's what you want. You want that fish to sink to the bottom of the lake so that it's not stinking and messing up the beautiful lake and wherever you're at. You don't want that to stink and be all nasty and represent that way. If it goes to the bottom of the lake, then other fish can eat it. Sorry guys, give me just a second. I got a hitch in my throat. Okay. Let's see. I saw a chat come up here.
Yeah, they're asking anywhere near Richmond. there is a Kentucky River, and as far as I know, there is no regulations keeping you from bow fishing in Lake Reba or Owsley or anything like that. Private ponds work too. They could have some potential fish you could harvest as well.
Oh yeah, my pond had a carp when we got here. There was a bunch of when we moved in here. There was a bunch of carp in my pond. I will say, a lot of people put those triploid grass carp in their ponds. The department stocks them in some of the smaller lakes and that's really just to keep the vegetation down. And those grass carp will not reproduce. Therefore, I wouldn't shoot them. I would leave them because they have a purpose. But common carp, they're a little bit smaller and chunkier. So if you get to seeing the carp, grass carp are super long and skinny. That first picture of me holding up a fish, you can kind of see it in the very first picture of that slide. It's a long, skinny fish. That's what grass carp look like. Common carp are going to be just a little bit stouter, a little bit shorter and thicker. They almost look kind of like a buffalo as far as the form of them, but they'll be more of a yellowish orange color. But when they're underwater, you, for the most part, can't tell what color they are, especially down here. The water's usually a little stained. If you get a really super clear lake like Laurel Lake, you go down to Laurel Lake or what's another really clean one, Dale Hollow or something, you'll probably be able to tell the color in those places. But if the water's stained, you wouldn't be able to tell. And it is hard to tell what fish you're shooting at. A lot of times I can tell by the way the fish reacts, and that's just from practice. Like if you're a duck hunter, you know that it took you forever to be able to tell what kind of duck that is when it's flying, because every duck has a little different wing beat and stuff like that. Fish are the same way. Buffalo, they tend to spook really quick. They spook up though, and a lot of times buffalo will just do circles around your boat because they're just confused, and you can get multiple shots at them. Grass carp, you spook a grass carp, it's out of there. It does not hang around very long. Commons tend to just sit there. Sometimes common carp can be the easiest ones to shoot because they just tend to sit there. When you're talking about Asian carp, silvers, they're very spooky unless they're kind of far away. And then if they're right on the boat or right on the bank and you turn that light on, it doesn't take very long and they spook. You guys shoot pretty quick with them. But every now and again, you'll get one that's just far enough off that it hasn't spooked and you'll get more time to shoot at it. Big heads tend to, if they're up mouthing, they tend to stay there a little bit longer.
That was me. He asked the question where I said Lake Reba, and he is correct. It is on the list that it is not allowed. So this is new things I'm learning here as well. So good save there, Jason. That is correct.
Good call there. But yeah, the Kentucky River, I have fished the Kentucky River a lot. I've never bow fished it just because I moved down here to Western Kentucky. But as a kid, I fished it, and we used to catch gar all the time. And we'd get so mad that we were catching gar instead of bass or whatever else we were fishing for. And now looking back, there were some days that I probably could have shot 100 gar below one of the little dams on the Kentucky River. So I'd say in that area, central Kentucky, the Kentucky River is probably going to be ideal. If you're near Louisville, the Ohio is full of Asian carp as well. Just be careful if you're fishing below the dam, because I know in Louisville it gets a lot shallower and a lot rougher. And so only certain times of the year would be ideal for getting in a boat and fishing like that. But if you're down in Western Kentucky below Kentucky Dam or Barkley, very often you can get below there and fish. Now, sometimes they're pulling a bunch of water and it's not worth it. But if they're not pulling any water and it's calm, you can go out there and really put a hurting on them. Was that all the questions? Make sure.
Yeah, that's everything that I see. I will say this. I think a lot in the central part of the state, unless you're on the river specifically targeting it, a lot of people will just go do their normal fishing activities and bring their bow with them. That way, if the opportunity presents itself, I've seen a lot of kayak anglers with their bow strapped on the back of their kayaks, bass fishing on Elkhorn. Like it's the opportunities there. They're going to take it. If not, they're still fishing. So.
Yeah, my dad, he bass fishes a lot, and he bass fishes Harrington. And there are times on Harrington Lake that the carp are just when they're breeding, they'll come up to the surface and you could sit there and shoot common carp all day long. And so he'll take his sometimes. And if he just happens to hit that day where they're up spawning, he'll shoot a few carp. But yeah, that was a good point, Andrew, because that's one thing we do that a lot. We'll go out cat fishing or bluegill fishing or whatever, and we'll just have the bows on the boat. And if it works out and we start seeing fish, we'll shoot some fish. If not, no harm done. All right.
So Jason's asking about access points on the Kentucky River.
That's
There
gonna be a
is
question for you.
yeah, there is a lot of ramps for access on the Kentucky River. It really depends on where you're at, and I assume since you're in Richmond, the best thing to do is to go to that fishing page on our website, select Madison County, and it'll give you GPS location and the address of the ramp in that area. And you can even do a Google map search of it too to see kind of what you're looking at. So you can see if there's any creeks or anything you can push up into to look for these fish.
And I
That's where I
recommend
see a lot of them.
the dam.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I guess it's the turbulence in the water that bring
It's
them up.
oxygen levels.
Yeah, and those fish just congregate, and you can get out there, and there'll be days where you can't hardly look and not see a gar. But yeah, I definitely recommend the Kentucky River up that way. Let's see, another. Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions that they can think of? Or Andrew, if you think of something I haven't covered.
I've got one. Can you change the tips on your arrows, or do you have to buy a whole new arrow with a tip?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So it depends on the type of arrow, of course, but yes, a lot of times, see if I can get this in the video. This type of arrow that I have, I can take this tip off, and I will actually take this. It's in rough shape right now. I need to sharpen it, but I'll take this to a grinder and I will sharpen it every so often. It doesn't have to, this is not very sharp. I mean, it would take some force for me to actually like puncture myself with this because it's very dull, but it'll still puncture a fish. It doesn't take a whole lot to get through the skin of a fish. But every now and again, I will take it to a grinder. You can buy replacement tips. We always keep a box of replacement tips on the boat. We only use them when it like if this got really blunted because I hit a rock or something, I would replace it, but it doesn't have to be like razor sharp. It doesn't have to be like a broadhead because it just doesn't take that much to get into the fish. Even the gar, I can still shoot gar with this. Now gar, you might want a little sharper tip just because they're a little harder to get into, but it's all about shot placement. If you hit that gar in the right spot, it's still going to go in.
Now, you were talking about the tip there. Can you change the barb style too, or is that just that's how it comes with the arrow?
Can't change the barbs, but you can change the tip.
Okay.
So the very tip, what actually punctures the fish, you can change, but the barbs you cannot. That if once the barbs broke, I would just throw the arrow away and start over. You cannot fix these arrows but the good thing about fiberglass arrows is they're not like carbon arrows. If they get a little crack in them, you can still use them. They're not going to explode on you like a carbon arrow. But if they do break enough, it's not just a little crack. If they do break, just replace them because duct tape, it's not going to do it. But they aren't like carbon arrows. So do know, like, if you hit something and you felt like you cracked it a little bit, don't get nervous because it's not going to explode like a carbon arrow will. And that's really why they made them fiberglass too, because as much stuff as you'll shoot into and damage these arrows, if they were carbon arrows, you may get 2 or 3 shots out of an arrow and they would just be done. So they made these a lot more sturdy so that you can get a lot of shots. I'll tell you right now, this arrow right here, I've had on for probably almost a year now. I've gotten lucky, knock on wood, that I haven't lost. We usually lose a few arrows every now and again. You shoot into something a root wad or something. If you're shooting around lily pads are like the biggest enemy of bow fishing arrows. Because you get down in the roots of a lily pad, you're not getting that arrow back. So you just got to cut your line and cut your losses. But for the most part, they're expensive. So I do my best not to have to keep replacing arrows all the time. But those tips, yeah, that you can get new tips. Some of the bow fishing arrows, you might be able to replace the barbs. It really just depends on the style. But the ones we have, I don't know if you can see this, but it's got a little self-tapping not a screw, but something that goes all the way through the arrow. I don't think you'd be able to replace that. And I've never seen replacement parts for it. I've only seen replacement tips. Now you can replace the screw and I know it does, mine doesn't have it on here, but the little plastic piece that goes around this, you can replace that. I haven't worried about replacing the plastic piece because that screw does its job. It's really only there to keep this slide from going back, and that screw is enough. But you can replace nocks. We have replaced nocks several times. My nock's getting a little beat up. When you shoot a whole lot, you will tend to break nocks off. I will say that once you replace a nock on an arrow, it is never the same again. The original nocks that come on them usually last a very long time. Once you start replacing them, sometimes it'll be like every night one will pop off and it gets annoying. I don't know why, but we just can't figure out how to replace nocks to make them stay. But I guess it's because you're shooting in the water all the time and eventually maybe it melts the glue. I'm really not sure, but it is really hard to replace the nocks on them. Sometimes we just get frustrated and just swap out the arrows. Take the tip off and the screw off, get as many parts off of it as we can, the slide, and just throw the arrow away and get a new one.
We have a question. I don't know if you've had experience with this, but they're asking about the full bow fishing kits they can get at the stores. I think they're asking, do they work well? Is that a good starting point?
Yeah. So this right here, this bow was a full bow fishing kit. When I bought it, it had everything that it needed. It depends on the brand. Now, AMS is great. Cajun is good. Muzzy is good too. I just don't like the Muzzy reels. I don't like to have to push the button. Now they have come out with another reel that's like that, that spin cast reel that you don't have to push the button. I haven't used it yet. And the only reason that I'm kind of against it or not sure about it is because it's really heavy. These bottle reels are super lightweight. And if you're standing up there all night trying to fish, trying to shoot, the lighter the bow, the easier it is. And that's why I haven't tried that. But Muzzy makes great bows, and you can buy a Muzzy bow and just put an AMS or a different bottle reel. Cajun makes a bottle reel as well. But there are a lot of packages that come with everything together. Darton is a really good brand. We actually have a Darton bow on the bow. It's a backup bow that comes with everything, except it's not it is a true compound. It has let off. So that's one thing I would look at. Does it have let off, or will it allow you to snap shoot? I recommend snap shooting just because it allows you to be faster. And sometimes these fish move quick, and as soon as they see you, they're taking off. So if you can shoot quick, that can be an added benefit, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't use other types of bows. I'm trying to think of some other ones that come all together like that. You're probably gonna, if you're willing to spend the money, it's probably hard to find a full setup under $200 to $300. Especially if you find one under $200, you got a deal, and I would buy it, because the reel and the arrow and that setup is about $120 just by itself. Once you put the rests are about $30. So if you have an old bow or an old compound bow or something you want to use, I would say for about $150, you can have it completely set up for bow fishing, arrow, reel, and rest. And maybe take that up to $60, $160 to put the finger tabs on. You don't have to have these finger tabs, but they make a world of difference. Your fingers will be killing you after shooting 10, 15 times without those finger tabs. And I don't recommend trying to use a release. That can get dangerous. And I've seen it, and it's super dangerous to try to use a release, because you know how easy it is to hit that button and it go off. When you're shooting at fish, you're not stable, and sometimes you're twisting a little bit and stuff. It could easily go off when you're not expecting it, and that's just a safety hazard. We don't allow anybody. We actually had somebody ask last weekend, I've got a bow, I just want to put a reel on it, can I use my release? And I was like, no, not on our boat, because it gets dangerous. How is it to you? Oh, Courtney.
Yeah, he's asking how hard is it to use one bow for both hunting and fishing?
So I've done that before, actually. The biggest thing, just remember that once you take the rest off, if you use a whisker biscuit, you can leave the same rest on. If you leave something that encompasses the arrow, you can leave that on. But I would recommend taking your sights. You have to take your sights off to put the reel on. So you got to take your sights off. You can leave your peep sight on. If you've got a peep sight, that's no big deal. It won't get in the way of anything. You just won't be using it. Change your rest out. The biggest thing is if you're okay with right before bow season having to reset up and re-sight in your bow and retune it, however you got to do to get it shooting good again, you can use the same bow. You just have to be willing to do that, because once you take all that off, it's like starting all over again. You got to re-sight it in and all that good stuff, but it's definitely doable. I know a lot of people, I did it one year. I know a lot of people that do that. As soon as January archery season goes out, they swap over to put their bow fishing stuff on their bow, and then they'll swap it back out in August, usually get ready for September bow season.
So
I will say though, if you're pulling like 70 pounds though on your compound, that's going to be really hard to bow fish with. I mean, when you practice, you're probably shooting 20, 30 arrows at a time or so. When you're bow fishing, it's nothing to shoot 50, 60 times a night, sometimes 100, depending on where you're at and how many fish you got in your area. If you're down here, it's nothing to shoot 100 times in a night. So it would wear you out big time.
So I'm thinking saving money, because that's how I am. And I shoot traditional stuff, and I have a glove or a tab that I shoot with on my hand. Why do you use your style compared to that? Wouldn't that be easier? You wouldn't have to put nothing on your string. Is there an advantage to the kind you use over that?
No, I think it'd be the same difference. You could definitely put a glove on. The only thing that I would think would be a disadvantage is once you've got that, and I've never used a glove, so I don't know a whole lot about those gloves, but once you shoot a fish, you got to take it off and everything and unscrew your arrow and all that good stuff. And that glove is going to get nasty. That's another thing, guys. If you're going to bow fish, you better wear clothes that you do not mind getting bloody and slimy and scaly and nasty, because you will. I do my best to hang the fish off the side of the boat. And I don't think I even talked about this, how to take the fish off the hook. That's a good segue there, Andrew. I'll get back to what you were saying, but when you take a fish off the hook, everyone is a little bit different. Some of them you just unscrew a little bit. Some of them, this one you have to take the tip completely off, and I dropped it. But when you take that tip completely off, it allows these barbs to lay forward so that fish will slide right out. Some of them you just unscrew it a little bit and it'll allow that to slide out. It really just depends on the type. But if you have a glove on and you're trying to do all that, it might hinder you a little bit, but I don't see why you couldn't use a glove instead of the finger tabs. Especially if you're using your hunting bow and you don't want to put that on. I will say I've got a bow press, so it literally takes like 5 minutes to press the bow down and put these finger tabs on. I like them, but I only use this bow for bow fishing. So that's kind of the difference. If I was going to use my regular bow, maybe I would think about using those a glove. But I don't like to get covered in slime and stuff. So that's the only big thing for me. I wouldn't want that glove on because it would be so nasty by the end of the night. It'd be covered in blood and slime and just disgusting.
I just know that's something I use, and I could see a lot of people who do shoot recurves and stuff being like, well, I've got this, why spend money on this extra thing to put on?
Oh, yeah. And yeah, I completely agree. If that was the case, and if I was in the same boat like that, I would probably use the glove, just because, I mean, there's no sense in spending the money. And if you don't have a bow press, you're not going to be able to put those tabs on. You're going to have to go somewhere that has a bow press to be able to put them on, because you have to take the string off to do that. Now I will say those finger tabs, they really probably cost at the most $10 to $15, so they aren't expensive. And most of the time that I've run into before I got my bow press, if we bought the tabs at the archery shop, they would put them on for free. So that's just something to think about. If you're going to get them, ask the archery shop, hey, if I buy these, will y'all throw them on my bow real quick? Because it really doesn't take but like 5 minutes to do it. But if you don't want to mess with all that, you don't want to pay to get those finger tabs, yeah, that glove would totally work.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Courtney, for all your insight. Has anybody else got any questions, no matter how crazy you think they are? I'm sure it's something we've heard before. Anything at all? Okay. No. If that's the case, we'll call this over and wrap it up. Courtney, thank you for all your help, and I'll hang out for a little bit, and Courtney will hang out for a little bit if you come up with any other questions. If once you get off the webinar and you think of something else, shoot me an email and I'll get with Courtney and we'll get an answer back to you as soon as we can. And if we don't know, we'll find somebody who does. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions, and I will speak with Lisa Fry, who's in charge of NASP, and try to get something going with bow fishing, since there seems to be a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
So might as well get that going. I'm sure the kids would enjoy something else to do with their NASP bows, since they enjoy NASP so much. So, but yeah, we'll hang out for a little bit. But other than that, I appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.